Welcome to Thought for Thursdays in the middle of another busy week. And it's an interesting time because it looks as if we're facing some challenges and that lockdown that's been loosened could tighten up again and all of these questions. But in the midst of it, I'm concerned about loneliness. Now, I know that there are some people who haven't been lonely at all in lockdown. And it's not because they've bent the regulations, it's because they've actually found out what they are and know how to relate to one another despite the restrictions. But there are other people who even though things are easier than they were, actually are still as lonely as they've ever been. And that should really concern us. And I've been thinking about two verses in Psalm 68 where it says this. Psalm 68 verse 5 says this: a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. And that's absolutely thrilling, isn't it? That no matter how lone people are, God is there for them. If they're fatherless because they've been orphaned, God is there for them to be their father. If they've been bereaved and they're a widow, God is there to be their defender. But God is in heaven. And the very next verse goes on to say that God sets the lonely into families. And that brings it down from that sense of God's eternal dwelling place to where we are right now here on earth, to think about how we as families can actually embrace people. Now, some versions don't actually say God sets the lonely into families. They say God settles the lonely into families, which is slightly different because it shows us that yes, you can put someone into a family, but actually to get that bonding and to bring someone so that they really feel a part of that family can take time. But God's in that process in order to establish people and to make them feel at home in the midst of others. And we as a church have got a responsibility as God's family to think about how we are truly going to embrace people and make them feel welcome. This is so important, isn't it? Because, to have that heart that reaches out. We could say, well, people can contact one another, but sometimes we need to take the initiative. I've got a friend who is a church pastor and he's been planting a church. And when he looked at his congregation, he realized that most people don't engage through social media. And he realized he would have to be constantly on the phone to them all. And I really commend him for the way that he took on that responsibility. But here we are, we're the family of God. And I can't think of a better family that God wants to settle people into. So that puts a responsibility on us to be those who reach out and embrace people. Let's make it a principle that we don't want anyone out there to be lonely, and let's reach out with the love of God in order to embrace people. Well, it's been good to think with you today, but I look forward to thinking with you again next Thursday. Meanwhile, if you need any of my materials, please go to hughosgood.com and there's plenty there. Looking forward to seeing you again. Every blessing.